France has recently raised its retirement age, and here to talk about that, as well as the implications for us here in the United States, is Jonathan Price, who is the National Retirement Practice Leader and SVP for Segal. Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you, Bob. Great to be here.
It's great to have you here. So first, do you want to start with France and just sort of give us an overview of what happened there?
Sure. And the French system is interesting. It's a little bit more of a interconnected system between the federal retirement benefits as well as the private sector benefits. And in France, what has happened is the retirement age, the required retirement age, has switched from age 62 to age 64. And what I mean by it is switch is that it's going to be a phase-in over the series of a number of years, and has become now, it will take effect starting in the fall. So that's really the main thing that's happened in France. It's important to understand some of the factors there, because they certainly are relevant to the United States and other developed countries. The two really important ones to be cognizant of, number one, is longevity. We are living longer. It is a miracle of modern science. Longevity, people live longer, which means that retirements are longer unless people work a few more years. And so that's really one factor that they're thinking about in France. The second one is the ratio between the number of actives in the system who are paying into the retirement funds through taxes and contributions compared to the number of retirees who are receiving those benefits. So those are two big factors that are driving the change there. And in the United States, when we think about Social Security, which is really the main primary federal program for retirees, it's an income program for retirees, it's something to be cognizant of. We are a society which is also benefiting from the increased longevity. Therefore, we are a society where there are more and more retirees, baby boomers entering into their retirement years, and we would need to make sure that we have a sufficient base financially to support that retirement system.
Right. So here in the States, we're faced with the problem of our trust fund running a deficit in about 10 years or so. And there has been discussion about increasing the full retirement age in Social Security beyond 67. Talk more about that and the impact on working Americans, low-income earners, et cetera.
Sure. So it's important to realize that when we think about a program like Social Security, and we look back to changes in the past, particularly in the 1980s, there really are three types of changes that have and could occur. There could be a reduction in benefits. There could be a shortening the amount of time people receive benefits, in other words, pushing back the normal retirement age, or there could be an increase in taxes, or a combination of all three. And in fact, that's what we've seen in the past. Assuming that that we focus on that second factor, that there is an increase in the retirement age of the program, we need to think about what that means for the individual. They're going to have to work longer until they receive full retirement benefits, and what that kind of pressure that places on them and their retirement savings. And frankly, that adds a certain amount of stress to the individual. You alluded to lower income earners in the question. That's clearly the part of the population that's most dependent on Social Security as a primary source of their retirement income. And so that's typically a part of the population where they may not be able to save at all any other form of retirement savings, and fully dependent at the extreme. What's important to realize, though, and this is a really challenging statistic, is that roughly half of those earning $100,000 or more live paycheck to paycheck. What that means in practice, and I know you know this, Bob, what that means in practice, right, is that many folks who may otherwise we think of as fine savers, or we think of as someone who should be able to, and I say should in air quotes, should be able to save enough for retirement, and should be able to manage the challenges of a change in the normal retirement age for Social Security, may not actually be in a position, may not have had the opportunity, may not have had the discipline, may not have had the tools to save for retirement earlier on in their career to manage a change in the program, which again just adds to some of the stress, but also just adds to the conversation and the opportunity that we have to try to educate and inform folks so they can start to plan accordingly.
Right. So in terms of planning accordingly, there are a lot of stakeholders involved in this discussion. Talk more about those stakeholders and what could be done there.
Sure. So obviously the individual is the key here, but what we know is we start with is the most internal part of that of the stakeholders, which is I like to think of it as the kitchen table conversation. It's the individual, it's their spouse, their significant other, their children, their parents, their family members, the stress that they have in that conversation. And the question is, what are the stakeholders around them? What could they do to alleviate that stress, to empower those individuals to make the best decisions? And when we think about that, clearly employers play a really critical role. If you're part of a public sector or municipality, the public sector entity can play an important role. The federal government itself can play an important role here. So let's unpack what that means. Employers, again, we're working from the inside out. So employers are the next rung of care and concern after the individual, their family, their friends. So what does an employer do? Here they have to help them manage that kitchen table conversation, which is, I got to pay my mortgage, I got to pay off my student debt, but I also now need to save a little bit more for retirement. So whether it's a financial wellness program, whether it's better tools in the 401k plan, frankly, if it's a pension plan, does a lot of the work for you. And when employers think about benefits, and this is something that I find I'm personally impassioned about, is that balance between those kinds of programs which happen automatically and that create the right outcomes almost by default. A pension plan is a classic example of that. And those that require a tremendous amount of effort from the individual to succeed. Think of a 401k that doesn't have any of the auto features. That person has got to make all the right decisions for themselves. Balancing those two together and making sure that there's the right communication, there's the right plan design to be able to structure those. That's a big role that an employer can play. But I would just say, in addition to that, is empathy. Individuals need to know that the people around them care and employers care. So being empathic is not less important than having the right tools and the right resources. Along with that, though, coming back to the federal government, it is important that any kind of change happens slowly and incrementally, and we would expect that to be the case. There's no reason to think that a change to Social Security would be imminent or would be immediate. It would be, as we've seen in the past, and frankly, what France is doing is they're introducing it over an extended horizon, over nearly a decade of incrementally raising the retirement age in 3-month increments. That kind of slow incremental change does help to mitigate some of the bite, and it allows people to plan and think and prepare themselves emotionally and financially.
Right. Here in the U.S., when we last implemented the increase in the full retirement age, that took place initially in the 1980s, but took over decades to implement. Do you feel that time is running out in terms of at least the trust fund running a deficit in the next 10 years or so, and whether that creates any urgency around the need to act?
So you're clearly right that the earlier we address this, the earlier Congress addresses it, the slower, the less immediate and biting the changes would need to be. That said, again, there's tools to how this is done, whether it's the benefit level, the age of retirement, the tax levels, that could play different levers, and those can be impacted and introduced at different stages. So there are ways we could do this as a society that doesn't have to be immediately painful, that does allow each individual to plan accordingly. It might mean that somebody in their 60s sees no impact, and somebody in their 20s has 30 or 40 or even 50 years before they really need to prepare themselves for it. And that could be a powerful way to address it.
All right, Jonathan, we covered a lot of ground. Anything we missed or anything that just bears reemphasizing?
I think the key thing to emphasize here is for the individual is that there are a lot of stress points when it comes to personal finances, and Social Security is really not any different than that. It is a great opportunity, though, to create retirement income that's inflation adjusted. So it is a very important part of each of our individual retirement security. So don't lose sight of the value of it. But also, it's one piece of a broader puzzle of your individual personal financial journey. So be aware of that whole journey and plan accordingly.
Jonathan, a pleasure having you share your knowledge and wisdom with us. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.